Well, good morning. My name doesn't matter. What I've seen matters. What I have encountered matters. But my name does not matter. For more than 20 years, I have served the power of Rome in her army. I've served as a centurion in the area of Gaul, Spain, Egypt. And for the last number of years, the last 5 years, I have been serving in this festering pot called Jerusalem. It's hot. The people complain about everything. If it's too hot, it's too hot. If it's too cold, it's too cold. If it's too dry, it's too wet. If it's too wet, it's too dry. They complain about everything. But in my 5 years, I saw something that I had to come and tell you about. Have you ever heard of Jesus of Nazareth? I've been here long enough to have encountered the entire Jesus incident. I saw the man, crazy man that he was, named John. He baptized people in the water. That guy was nuts. He ate locusts and honey. We have better food than that in Rome. If that's what they consider a delicacy here in Jerusalem, it's no wonder nobody wants to come here. But Jesus, he came and began teaching in the wilderness, and people began to gather and listen. Now, 2 or 3 people gathering, Rome doesn't care. We don't mind. He's a teacher. We don't mind teaching. Teaching is good. Education is good. But when hundreds start gathering, Rome starts taking notice. We don't like large, unplanned groups gathering. We like to have control. So I've heard this Jesus teaching. I heard him saying things like, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. That's not new. I've heard him say things like, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, it's a little extreme, but okay. And then I heard him say things like, turn the other cheek. Can you imagine me telling my soldiers that? I don't think so. Things like, pick up your cross and follow me. Wow, I wonder if he knew how accurate that was going to be. And then I heard him one day say that his body was the bread, and that if you didn't eat that bread, you would not have life. And me and my soldiers stood back, scratching our heads, wondering what type of crazy man these people were listening to. In fact, a number of his own followers left him after that one. Maybe just a little too extreme. We heard stories, and we wrote them off. I mean, we're Romans. Healings? Really? Blind men seeing? I don't think so. Deaf people hearing? Come on. And get this, dead people being raised. We passed it all off as sleight of hand trickery jokes. Until one of my friends, a fellow Centurion, his son fell sick. He spent an exorbitant amount of money on doctors. He brought doctors in from Rome. No good. He talked to the Jewish priests. Sorry, they didn't help. His son was dying. And in desperation, my friend sent to Jesus. And the boy got better. Now, as a centurion, I'm a soldier. I see the black and the white. You're either alive or you're dead. You're either for us or you're against us. You're either a friend or a foe. And so there is no room in my training for this type of stuff. And so we dismissed it. It was coincidence. And that was comfortable. That was easy. And then Jesus came into the city of Jerusalem being hailed as the Son of David, the one they called the Messiah. And we thought, oh my goodness, there's a riot about to happen. But it didn't. The week went along rather peacefully, and then Jesus got arrested. I do not understand these Jewish people. One minute they're hailing him as their king. Then they're arresting him. It must be this Judean son. It bakes the brain. I did not see Jesus get arrested. I came into the picture after he came to the palace before the governor Pilate. And when they brought him in, he was already beaten and bruised and bleeding. Apparently, the Jewish method of interrogation is a little bit more hands-on than we're used to. They brought him before Pilate. And Pilate interrogated him, and Jesus mumbled something about truth and about his kingdom not being of this world. And Pilate looked at him and said, "So you are a king?" And Jesus said, "So you have said." And Pilate kind of shook his head and went out and told the Jewish leaders that he found nothing wrong with the man. That's when he found out that Jesus was from Galilee. How convenient, because Herod, the ruler of Galilee, was there in the city. So guess what Pilate did? He passed the blame and the prophet, so to speak. So Jesus went before Herod and nothing. He wouldn't perform for Herod, so Herod sent him back to Pilate. In the meantime, Herod's wife had come and said, "Have nothing to do with this man. He is a holy man, a righteous man, and I suffered horribly in a dream because of him. Do not have anything to do with this." But Pilate did not have that choice. Jesus was brought back before Pilate. And once again, Pilate interrogated him, and once again, he told the Jewish leaders, "There's nothing wrong with this man." But they screamed and they yelled, and my men and I were brought to attention because of the threat of a riot. And so in order to placate the crowd, Pilate said, "I will have him scourged, I will have him flogged, I will have him beaten. But I have found nothing wrong with the man." So Jesus was handed over to me. And I took him down, and my soldiers strapped him to the post and began to whip him. And he made no sound. He flinched, he grimaced, but he did not open his mouth. He did not scream. He did not complain. And it made my men furious. They wanted to hear him scream. And so they whipped him harder. And when I showed up, they had gone too far. Excuse me. We brought Jesus back to Pilate, and I could see from the governor's face that we had gone way too far. We thought we were doing what was right. We were obeying orders. Soldiers obey their orders. We thought we were doing the right thing. We didn't know who this man was. If we had only known. If we had only known. So Jesus was displayed before the Jewish leaders, beaten, bleeding, barely able to stand. Pilate said, "Here is the man." And they screamed for him to be condemned. And Pilate looked at me and I looked at Pilate. We did not understand what was going on. This man obviously had been punished. He had not done anything worthy of more. But they cried out for more. So Pilate brought out Barabbas, a notorious murderer. And he said, it's your custom for me to release one person. Do you want me to release this Jesus who you call the Christ, your king? Or do you want me to release this murderer to you? And the Jewish high priest said something that none of us ever thought we would hear coming from a Jewish mouth. He said, we have no king but Caesar. And in that moment, we knew that Jesus was done for. What should I do with Jesus? Pilate said. And the Jewish high priest started the chant, crucify him. Pilate turned white as a ghost. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was one thing to ask for an execution, but for this man to be crucified? It was the most horrible of deaths, reserved for convicted and condemned wicked sinners. And they were crying for Jesus to be crucified. Pilate washed his hands and said, his blood is on your hands, not mine. He handed him over to me. Might not be on your hands, Pilate, but obviously he's going to be on mine. And we let him out. Roman law says that the condemned man has to carry his own cross. Jesus could barely walk. And halfway along the Via Dolorosa, he fell. And so I grabbed a man from the sidelines and I pressed him into service, and you will carry this cross. And so he and Jesus picked up the cross and they finished the march. And when we got to the top of their mountain of crucifixion, I drove the nails. I laid that innocent man down on the cross. I stretched out his arms and I nailed his hands and his feet to the cross. And as I knelt down, driving those nails home, I got close enough that even though my eyesight has been failing for years, I could see him clearly. And he turned his face towards me and he said, I forgive you. I was driving nails into him and he forgave me. He should have hated me. But there was no hate there. He should have been furious. But there was no anger. It was something I'd never seen in a convicted criminal before. There was something I had never seen on a crucified man's face. There was love. How dare he? How dare he? The one being crucified is not supposed to forgive or love the person doing the crucifying. And yet he did. And it shook me to the core so badly that I did not even notice when my men lifted his cross into place. I stood there staring. Who is this man who forgives the one who is driving home the nails? And I began remembering stories, my friend's son being healed, blind men seeing, deaf people hearing, lame people walking, lepers being healed, people that nobody would touch. And this man would embrace them. I heard that he went and ruined a funeral by raising the young man back to life. He ruined the funeral. Don't think his mother objected. For hours, he suffered on the cross, saying very few things. one point in time, he turned his face toward heaven and he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He was talking to me. Two men on the other crosses cursed and yelled at him in Hebrew and Aramaic for hours, and then one of them made some sort of plea. I did not understand everything, but from the tone in Jesus' voice, I know he was forgiving him too. I couldn't move. And right around lunchtime, he spoke to his mother and to one of his disciples. And then he looked at me, and in Greek, he said, I'm thirsty. Suddenly able to move again, I put a sponge on a stick, and I put in some wine, and I gave it to him. And he smiled. Then he looked up towards heaven, and he looked over at his mother, and he said, it's finished. And he bowed his head, and he died. After all that innocent man was gone. And immediately, it was like the earth revolted. The entire hilltop, the entire city of Jerusalem was shaken with an earthquake. I was thrown to the ground. My men were tossed around like paper in the wind. Buildings collapsed down below the hillside. A horrible tearing sound took place over the wind, and I found out later that the curtain in the temple, 6 inches thick, ripped top to bottom. Darkness covered the earth. Rain began, wind out of nowhere. And I swear, for a moment, standing there, it was like I could hear two sides of opposing forces. On one side, there was maniacal laughter. On the other hand, there was weeping. And I was in the middle, still completely unable to move. My men had gambled for Jesus' clothes, and I could do nothing. They laughed and scorned at him, and I could do nothing. People cursed and swore at him, and I could do nothing but stand there and stare. Shortly after the earthquake, Pilate sent word that we had to put an end to this, and so he ordered that we break the legs of the two criminals, and so we did. But when they came to break Jesus' legs, I wouldn't let them. He was already dead. My man said, we have to make sure, you know that. So I grabbed a spear nearby and I pierced his side. And when I pulled it out, I was overwhelmed with his blood. It covered me. And in that instant, my eyesight was completely healed. In his death, he healed me. Me, the one who drove the nails, the one who stood by and did nothing. And he healed me. I put down the spear. I marched down the hill. I marched right into the palace. I took off my armor and I put on my clothing. I resigned my commission in Rome's army. And I took my sword and I went back up onto that hillside, making a vow they would not desecrate his body anymore. I did not know who this man had been, but he must have been the Son of God. I couldn't write it off anymore. I couldn't dismiss what had happened. There were too many coincidences. One of Jesus' disciples named John found me a few hours later, guarding his body. I helped him lower Jesus' body to the ground so that his mother could bury him. They took his body away, and I sat down on the hillside, overcome and overwhelmed with the guilt of what I had done. How could I ever be forgiven? How could I ever look myself in a mirror? How could I ever face my family again? Not only did I put an innocent man to death, but I put somebody much more than a man to death. I lost track of time. Hours turned into a couple of days. John came back up onto the hillside, and he gave me some water and some food. I was still sitting there with my sword. I hadn't moved. He said, I need to tell you something. What? He said, something happened early this morning that you need to know about. What? He said, God raised Jesus from the dead. Have you ever had one of those moments where somebody says something where you understand the words, but it makes no sense? Because I drove home those nails. I saw the whipping. I saw the torture. I saw the beating. And I drove home that spear. There is no way. John said, no. He rose this morning. Some of our women have seen him. Peter has seen him. And I just sat there shaking my head. I wanted to believe him. I wanted it to be true. But you don't come back from a Roman crucifixion. You don't. There's no coming back from that. So John walked down the hill again and left me there in my stupor. A little while later, as my head was bowed and finally some tears had been coming to my eyes, a hand was laid on my shoulder and I looked up. There was a man standing over me. I could not see his face, but I could see his eyes. And I knew those eyes. They weren't puffy anymore. There was no blood on the face. They were clear, but that same love was there. And I looked at the hand on my shoulder and I saw the scar. I saw the hole where I had driven the nails. Then Jesus showed me his side, and I saw the spear wound in his side where I had driven it home. He really was alive. He really was alive. Rome lost. Pilate lost. I turned around and I knelt in front of him, and he put his hands on either side of my shoulders, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, I meant what I said. I forgive you. Now, follow me. And just like that, he was gone. I stood up looking around, trying to figure out where he could have disappeared to that fast, when John came up the hill again with this stupid smile on his face, like he knew something I didn't. He didn't say, I told you so. But he should have. But everything about him screamed it. And he took me to Peter. And I told Peter my story, and Peter is the one who told me to come and tell you. You see, Jesus is alive. You may choose not to believe it. That doesn't change the truth of it. But here is what his resurrection does. It breaks the power of evil in your life. God's justice has won. God has paid the price for your mistakes. Every bad thought, every bad deed, every bad action, I know because I did them. Every bad choice. You can't make a worse choice than putting the Christ on the cross. You can't make a worse action than that. You can't have a worse thought than that. But he forgave me, so he will forgive you. But just like me, you have to come to the place where you say, I can't explain it away anymore. Jesus once, on one of those hillsides where I heard him preaching, said that he was the way and the truth and the life. I didn't mind that. But then he said, nobody comes to his Father, God, except through him. I had a problem with that. I'm a Roman. We believe in many ways. But Jesus closed that door and he said, no, there's only one way. You have to come to the place where you're willing to accept the one way. And then his death on the cross will work for you too. He can heal. I've seen it. I can clearly see that he is able to heal. He can raise from the dead. He can forgive sins. And he is alive today to do it. Now I understand there are a couple of people who are willing to come up and pray for you this morning. So I'm going to ask you to come stand right here. I believe there's a gentleman and a lady who have agreed to come and pray, so if you could just come up here. If you have a need this morning, these two followers of Jesus are here to pray for you. Do not leave if you have a need. Bring it to God. If you are here this morning and you're going, I don't know if I believe, that's a step. Be willing to believe. That's a step. But here is the question that all of us have to answer. What is keeping you from following Jesus today? My prayer is I hope it's nothing. And that you, like me, will sign up for his army and leave the armies of this world to fight their own battles. God bless you as you come up for prayer.